the Justice Department is now facing growing scrutiny over how it handled the release of the initial batches of documents tied to convicted sex offender Jeffrey Epstein. What was supposed to be a moment of transparency quickly turned into confusion, frustration, and backlash, as more than 550 pages of material were released fully redacted. Page after page blacked out completely. And so far, only a small fraction of the hundreds of thousands of documents connected to Epstein have actually been made public. Almost immediately, critics began asking the same question. If the goal was transparency, why did the release feel so deliberately incomplete? Why release documents that reveal just enough to provoke outrage, but not enough to explain anything? And then there was the image that changed the entire conversation. Why is this picture in the Epstein files? That's what people started asking when a photo surfaced showing Michael Jackson standing alongside Bill Clinton and Diana Ross, with two faces blacked out in the frame. The way the image was presented created an immediate implication, especially given the context of Epstein's crimes. Online, speculation exploded before anyone paused to verify what they were actually looking at. Very quickly, the internet went to work. The original, unedited version of the photo was found. It wasn't hidden. It wasn't secret. It wasn't exclusive to the Epstein files. It had been publicly available for years on Getty Images. The image was taken at a public fundraiser, one of many high-profile events attended by celebrities, politicians, and donors during that era. And those blacked-out faces. They weren't unidentified minors. They were Epstein-related victims. They were Michael Jackson's own children. That detail alone shifted the entire narrative. But by the time it surfaced, the implication had already spread. The Department of Justice had released a cropped, altered presentation of the image without context, and in doing so, placed Michael Jackson's name back into one of the most toxic scandals in modern history. This time, not through rumor or tabloid speculation, but through a federal document release. That distinction matters, because Michael Jackson's family says this wasn't just misleading. They claim it crossed a line that can't be undone. According to sources close to the family, Paris Jackson and Janet Jackson are now pursuing legal action against the Department of Justice, alleging that the release included images that were doctored, misrepresented, and falsely tied to Michael Jackson in a way that implied criminal behavior where none existed. The reported lawsuit seeks $100 million in damages, not as a financial move, but as a statement. Whether or not that lawsuit ultimately proceeds, the reasoning behind it is clear. Michael Jackson's name has been dragged through courtrooms and headlines for decades, even after acquittals, even after investigations found no evidence, and even after his death. But this wasn't a blog post or a social media rumor. This was the federal government releasing material that visually linked him to Epstein without evidence or explanation. Which raises a question that hasn't gone away. Did anyone actually verify how this material would be interpreted before releasing it? Or did they decide the fallout didn't matter because Michael Jackson isn't alive to defend himself? As the image continued to circulate, critics began pointing out how it was framed. The blurring wasn't neutral. The cropping wasn't accidental. The presentation invited speculation while withholding clarification. And in a case like Epstein's, implication alone is enough to permanently stain a name. This is what people mean when they say context matters. The latest Epstein document drop was massive, over 300,000 files released in a single sweep. But almost immediately, one fact stood out more than any other. Nearly 90% of it was redacted. Page after page where names were removed, timelines disrupted, and testimony reduced to fragments. The documents told just enough to spark outrage, but not enough to assign responsibility. And in the middle of all that black ink, one image cut through. The photo of Michael Jackson with Bill Clinton and Diana Ross spread rapidly. Screenshots, reposts, reaction videos. The implication traveled faster than the truth. But when the full, unedited photo surfaced, it told a very different story. Those blacked-out faces weren't random children. They were Michael's own kids, and the event wasn't private. It was Epstein's island. It wasn't a secret gathering. It was a public fundraiser, one of many where powerful people crossed paths without any deeper connection. Even commentators who are not fans of Michael Jackson acknowledged the issue. They pointed out that the blurred image and the unblurred image were taken the same night, from different angles, showing the same people. There was nothing controversial about it. The controversy was created by how it was presented. Before going any further, one fact needs to be clearly stated. Despite Michael Jackson's name appearing in the unsealed Epstein files, there are no accusations tied to him. No criminal allegations. No claims of involvement in Epstein's trafficking operation. None. So why was Michael Jackson connected to Epstein at all? The answer is far less dramatic than the implication suggests. By the early 2000s, Michael Jackson was facing significant financial pressure. He was exploring property purchases and restructuring his finances. During that time, he sought the help of a financial advisor. That advisor also worked with Jeffrey Epstein. That overlap led to a business meeting at Epstein's Palm Beach home in 2002. A witness to that meeting, Michael Jackson's bodyguard at the time, later confirmed why Michael was present. Just as importantly, he confirmed that there were no interactions with minors during the visit. That context exists. It has been reported before, but it did not accompany the release of the files. Once the documents went live, assumptions moved faster than facts. And this isn't new. Michael Jackson's name has been treated like an open file for decades, something that can be reopened whenever a scandal needs a recognizable figure. From the late 1990s through the late 2000s, his reputation was shaped less by verdicts and more by suspicion. Even FBI investigations that ran for years found nothing, but suspicion, once planted, tends to outlive evidence. That's why this Epstein photo hit differently. To Paris Jackson and Janet Jackson, this wasn't just another rumor cycle. It felt like the same pattern repeating itself. A familiar name pulled into a scandal to absorb attention, while other names remained hidden. This time, instead of letting it pass, they decided to draw a line. Because if they didn't, there was no reason to believe it would ever stop. As the images circulated, members of the Jackson family began calling out how the documents were presented. They pointed to names and images released without explanation, visuals cropped in a way that implied wrongdoing without stating it outright. Taj Jackson was among the first to address it publicly. In a post that quickly went viral, he thanked fans for shutting down the narrative before it could spiral further. Then he addressed what he sees as the larger pattern. He said Michael is constantly being used as a distraction, a scapegoat, a smokescreen for others. That sentiment resonated widely, because by that point, public frustration had shifted from confusion to anger. Many people weren't satisfied with corrections or clarifications anymore. They wanted accountability. One viral response aimed directly at the family summed it up. It argued that the federal government had released doctored images of Michael Jackson and his own children, placed them inside the Epstein files, and allowed them to circulate globally as implied evidence. Tweets, the comment said, weren't enough. There needed to be consequences. By then, the pressure was no longer just on the media. It was moving toward the people who released the files in the first place. And that's where the story takes a broader turn. Because when you zoom out, Michael Jackson's inclusion in the Epstein files doesn't expose power. It diverts attention from it. More than 90% of the documents were redacted, names removed, context erased, timelines broken, yet the release was framed as transparency. One unredacted section includes testimony accusing Donald Trump of sexual assault. Other parts raise questions about whether Epstein's death was truly a suicide. But those elements haven't been fully explained or addressed publicly. Instead, the figures most visible in the release are the ones whose reputations are already damaged or fixed in public perception. Prince Andrew, Bill Clinton, and Michael Jackson. People who can absorb the impact without shifting the balance of power. Michael Jackson, in particular, is no longer here to respond, testify, or correct the record himself. His image takes the hit, while those with influence remain protected behind redactions. So the question becomes less about who appeared in the files, and more about who didn't. Who the black ink is still shielding. Because the files, as released, were never meant to tell the full story. They were meant to tell just enough to satisfy public demand, while keeping the most sensitive details buried. And in that process, a familiar name was used to carry the weight. For Paris and Janet Jackson, this moment represents more than reputational damage. It's about setting a about saying that Michael Jackson's name cannot continue to be used as cover for institutional failure. Whether through a lawsuit or public pressure, their message is clear. This stops here. Because if it doesn't, then Michael Jackson's legacy will always remain the easiest one to sacrifice whenever the truth becomes inconvenient. And until the full, unredacted story is told, the debate won't be about justice. It will be about who paid the price for silence.